Okay, I believe that we are ready to run. Perfect. Okay, welcome back, both you that are participating online and digitally, and those here gathered in the room at the Swedish Natural History Museum. The theme for the afternoon, let me show you, it's accessibility to and involvement in science. And we have divided the afternoon into two different panel discussions that will be very interesting and exciting to listen into. And I'm sure that it will also be possible to ask questions. So please use the Menti functionality to send in your questions. And the moderator here to lead the discussion is Christine Sundberg Carendi. You are the Secretary General for the Swedish Science Centers, and it's a pleasure to have you here. So please take this forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. And the Swedish Science Center Association is pleased to be a partner to this conference today. And I have the privilege to work with 20 science centers around Sweden. And we would like to give everyone the opportunity to increase their science capital. And if you're not familiar with the concept of science capital, you will hear more about that very soon. And regardless of background, everyone should get the chance to increase their knowledge in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we would like to lift our contribution to society from a holistic perspective, not the traditional silos that we can see within politics and public administration. We open doors through STEM. By adding an A, as in arts, we open up for people with other initial interests. As you can see, all parts are interlinked, and science communication, of course, has a very clear connection to lifelong learning. And as we could hear before lunch, unfortunately, there's no lack of challenges around us. We need to secure democratic societies as well as sustainable futures. And science communication and science engagement are key in many of those challenges. And before lunch, we had the focus on policy and some practice, and now we'll have even more focus on practice. Because museums and science centers are important actors when it comes to engaging citizens in science. And this afternoon, we will start by addressing how we secure accessibility to science, and what best practice can we share in how to create science involvement and engagement. A warm welcome to everyone in the room, as well to those who participate online. And you're all welcome to send your questions and comments through Menti. And you'll soon see the code, and it will be here throughout. We will also open up for questions from you in the room a little bit later on. And I would like to welcome our first panelists. Please welcome up the three of you. And welcome, I'll start in the back, Peter C. Kjærgaard. You're director of the Natural History Museum of Denmark. Welcome to Stockholm.
Thank you.
And I wonder, for your own lifelong learning, is there a certain place that you prefer to go to when you feel the need for experience-based learning? And you cannot choose your own museum.
I go to my own museum often enough, and I do like to go to natural history museums. In fact, our children, they regularly tell me that they grew up in natural history museums. But where I really like to go are places that challenge my thinking, places that are good at reaching out to communities that we don't or rarely see at museums or in cultural institutions. institutions, organizations that are engaging with these communities, bringing them in, making them not visitors, but part of the family. And from my perspective, we have a lot to learn between different cultural institutions. The world is connected. The natural world is connected. Our cultural worlds are connected, but we've been very good at separating those different worlds into different disciplinary sectors, including, which is also reflected in all of our cultural institutions. We should work far more together. We should look to each other, be inspired by each other. So from my perspective, it's interesting to see what are they doing in art museums of engaging with their community. Is there anything that we can learn? And to engage with our communities, could we bring our communities together? Because I don't believe that these are and should be separate communities. So to answer your questions, everywhere.
I'll try to get another answer for you later on as well. Carina Halvord, you're CEO of Universeum in Gothenburg. And I know that you have a very clear view of your lifelong learning. You change areas quite often, and you go deep. You're serious about it too.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago it was tennis, and now I know you recently bought a grand piano.
Yes.
Is that for pure pleasure when you get a feeling, or do you have a goal?
Well, yeah, I do have a goal to stay curious, and that's why I try to challenge myself on a regular basis to learn new things. And started off turning 50 when I started my own rock band. I can recommend that, to learn how to play guitar and to do stage dive. That was fantastic. And then on to tennis, as you said, and now my latest passion is actually to regain the capacity to play the piano. So I bought a mini grand piano. And I do have a goal. I hope my sons are not listening because it's a secret. I do want to play when they marry. For the youngest son, I'd like to play Nothing Else Matters, Metallica song, but in a classical way. And for my older sons, I have another song, Until I Found It, and I'd like to sing to that as well. So, my God, it's a challenge. But yeah, it drives me forward, it gives me energy, and it challenges me in new ways that work life doesn't do.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sebastian Kvist, you are a Director of Research and Collections here at the museum. And when I did some research before this session, I saw on LinkedIn that you are a leech enthusiast.
Leech enthusiast, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that triggered my wish for lifelong learning. So I would like to ask you for the elevator pitch for leeches. And
that's right.
Only a 2-story high elevator.
That's right, a very quick one. In lieu of becoming a rock star, I became a leech enthusiast. And I think those are at the same level in society, I think. I studied, my research background allowed me to study blood-feeding leeches and the evolution of those. And I think this is the strength of science and research and engagement, is that something that can be so very esoteric to a lot of people is someone else's real passion. And therein lies the challenge, but also the opportunity, is to engage people in something that is so far away from what they might know, but that can help and benefit them in their everyday lives, I think is a challenge, especially for a leech enthusiast.
Thank you. I think I stuck to the interest there, yeah. Thank you so much, and welcome all of you. I would like to start with you, Peter, for a short introduction, and you will get the clicker here. Mm-hmm. And Carina and Sebastian, if you want to see this presentation, you have some high chairs over there.
So what I would like to talk to you about this afternoon is the concept or the question of natural history museums for the future. And one of the things that we need to address is the question of relevance. Why are natural history museums relevant? Why do we meet for such a conference at a natural history museum? And the claim that I want to make is that natural history museums have never been more important. The world is changing. We've had several people addressing this issue today, and we have to adapt to that changing world. We need to think about how we as naturalist museums can be relevant, how we can continue to provide value to society and to our citizens. And the situation that we're in today calls upon action. It calls upon cultural institutions taking a bigger responsibility than what we've had done previously. Naturalist museums have changed during the centuries from curiosity cabinets, collections, to the monumental repositories, to science centres, public education centres, biodiversity centres. The question is, do we need to be something different today? Now we're entering the second quarter of the 21st century. It's not enough just to think about us as 21st century institutions. We are indeed entering the second quarter, and things are happening on this planet that needs to be addressed. All the things that we have experienced and learned during the pandemic, that human health and nature's health are deeply connected, is a lesson that we cannot and must not forget. Another thing that we must not forget from the pandemic is the fact that if we do stand together and if we do work together as a global community, we can make a difference, and the planet really needs this. We can be centres for change and naturalist museums. We can be platforms for informed discussions, as indeed we are today. We can be inclusive and diverse. We can be places, platforms where people can meet across differences and have this serious discussion about the world that we share. It's also, from our perspective, about open science, and open science for everyone. Scientific knowledge has no value in itself. It needs to be communicated, it needs to be used, and we need, as we heard this morning, indeed to democratize our knowledge and to make our natural history collections accessible to everyone across the globe. We don't see this as national collections at natural history museums. We see this more and more. We see ourselves more and more as guardians of a global natural heritage that we need to maintain, preserve, but also make accessible so it can be used by everyone and should be accessible by anyone. We cannot do this on our own, which is why among all the UN Sustainable Development Goals, number 17 is the most important for me. We need to collaborate, not just between museums, cultural institutions, but to bring stakeholders together. Again, natural history museums are perfectly situated to bring stakeholders together who might be more territorial traditionally, but we can provide that neutral platform, and we need that engaged conversation. And major museums, such as national naturalist museums, like this museum, like our museums, we have major responsibilities, and we need to take that responsibility upon us. For us, it's about positive change for people and planet by promoting a scientific understanding of the natural world, to give people tools to make real change in their lives. We are facing a serious situation. We've heard about this earlier during this conference of facts versus opinion and information overload, lack of trust in scientific institutions and authorities, etc. And this is increasing, and we need to do something about it. It also adds into the hectic living, a feeling of hectic pace. If a lot of things are going on electronic media, on social media, and we need to be able to provide for everyone a break of opportunities of engaging in real questions, in solutions to the major problems that we are facing. For that purpose, we're building a new museum in Copenhagen, supporting our vision of connecting people and nature, which is what it's all about for us. It's about connections between people and nature, but also connections between people. In the Botanic Garden Center of Copenhagen, 2 stories underground with new permanent galleries, creating an all-new vision for how everything in the natural world is connected, and that we as humans are not separate from the natural world, but we are part of it. We're one big connected network of people and the rest of the natural world.
Looking forward to visit this new museum as well. And Carina, the floor is yours.
Here we go. All right, thank you. Well, Universeum is part of the community that Christine addressed earlier, the 20 science centers throughout Sweden. And we opened in 2001, and I'd like to start by giving credit to our founders and to the Swedish government at the time that made sure that we were formed and based on a true quadruple helix model, that we do on a daily basis have the support from our founders, the academia through Chalmers University and Technology and the University of Gothenburg, the public sector through the region of Gothenburg, and the business community through the West Sweden Chamber of Commerce. And also that the government at the time realized the fact that we need to be interdisciplinary. So we had the support from the Minister of Economy and the Minister of Environment. They together gave us the assignment to be a national science center and to address sustainability from start in 2001. And I wish, are there any politicians left in the room? Yes, Lena. Perfect. To you and all you who are online, I wish for you to give us science centers and museums this assignment on a long-term basis and make the conditions strong for us to do this work. There is something that we all together need to do on a daily basis in order for us to create science engagement and involvement. And that needs to start with building the science capital in the society. Because it's not until each individual has a strong science capital that they truly can engage in complex science and technology. And I know this crowd, you know that this is normally put together in 8 bullet points. I've shortened it down to 4. It's about science you know, that you really understand what is science, how does it work, what skills do I need. It's about how you think about science. Do you think it's relevant in your daily life? Do you see the utility of it? It is what you do. Take, for example, your media consumption. Do you actually read science articles? Do you look in social media on science articles? Do you watch TV programs and so forth? And it's also about who you know, who you really know, that is close to you, a relative, a friend, someone in the community that is actively involved in science, and also encourages you to continue on that path. So this is sort of the total science capital, and we need to be in that. That's actually what we do, all of us together, on a daily basis. And again, please give us the structure sort of the political system to support us doing that, because without that we can never create science engagement. And I'm going to give you 4 examples on what we can do more. And the examples are from Universeum, but I know they resonate with what my colleagues throughout the country and otherwise do. One thing we need to do is to actually challenge ourselves. As we heard before from Peter, the society is complex and is growing more and more complex, and that demands us to work in new ways. So we need to develop our methods continuously. And for example, here we had it started as a project to learn. We call it the power of youth. We had a holistic view on how can we make sure that more students pass exit from the primary school with passing grades so that they can move on in the educational system and they can actually get a job on forward in life. In Sweden, approximately 1 out of 4 doesn't do this. And there are areas as this one where we started our work where 3 out of 4 students didn't pass primary school with passing grades. So we had a holistic view. We worked with parents, we worked with all school staff, we worked with all students from age 6 to 16 in a sort of a systematic way and simultaneously to see how will this actually, how can this help the students? And after 4 years, we saw that the teachers as well as the parents were reinforced in their roles, supporting the kids. The students themselves gained confidence and actually learn more. And we saw that in 4 years, the number increased from 27% of the kids to 47% of the students leaving primary schools with passing grades. So having these holistic views, understanding that you need to work with all these different people simultaneously will help the issue. And we've implemented this method now in our daily work. Another example is to take this method and then broaden the reach, going from the school to the municipality. And now we are working with several my God, that word in English, municipalities. And they have engaged for a number of years forward where they together, oh my goodness, address learning for sustainable development. And here we as a science center can act as process leaders and competence enablers, where we meet these different parties over and over again, over time, and we make them talk with each other. And that creates some sort of science engagement. Third example is that we also, as a science center, can work cross-community together with others, with healthcare services, with social services, with the police, and so forth. And we do that as well in the city of Gothenburg, seeing great results doing that. That is us doing more for science engagement. And the last example is throughout these different methods, of course, we as Science Center, we can do more by integrating new technology. We still have hands-on experiences, but we also need to integrate new technology. And when we want to close the gap between research data and us citizens, we need to enable us to understand these complex data. And we can do this better now by using visualization and putting these data into sort of context that is relevant to us, our daily questions that we have, that enable us to engage with this research and actually discovering it, and also sometimes participating in the research by using this new technology as visualization, for example. Last slide. This is a challenge. It is our force that we work interdisciplinary. Also, I would say over generations. This is really a strength that we have as science museums and museums, that we put research into context, and that also we address different research at the same time, simultaneously. We need to be able to do that in order to find new sustainable solutions. That is also a dilemma. Again, Lynn, I'm sorry, I'm addressing you, but you stand for the politics. This is also a dilemma for it, because it means that we force we fall between chairs when we try to get the ear from the political system. We could be in the Ministry of Education, obviously, but also in the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Economy, and so forth. And therefore, we have a hard time finding who to talk to, who to get the ear from to actually give us a long-term assignment and using us as the true force that we really are. Thank you.
Last but not least.
Thank you so much. See if I can get this mic on. Does it sound like it's on? Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so we were given 7 minutes to talk about our outlook on science engagement, and I think everyone knows that it can't be done in 7 minutes. It needs a longer discussion, I think. And I sort of have heard pretty much everything that I'll talk about from my two colleagues as well. But I anticipated them covering a lot of what I wanted to cover. So my presentation might be slightly different, although I will be skipping my slide on Science Capital now. Thank you, Carina. I can save time there. But basically, I'm going to try to take you through a what, who, and why of science engagement. Okay, so what is it really that we're offering when we talk about science engagement from a natural history museum and a science center point of view? Well, I think we all would agree, the three of us at least, that we want to try to provide an immersive, a fun and engaging experience for everyone that joins. And this concept of lifelong learning is particularly important, I think, at science centers and natural history museums, because we cater to people of all ages, from very young kids to seniors in society. So that becomes a really important thing. But what is it? What is embedded in an immersive, fun, and engaging experience? We can all say those words, and what do they mean? Well, I actually will become quite dry here, and some of you, at least from this institution, will recognize this slide and know it quite intimately. I think we are offering information, right? That is essentially what we're offering, but not any type of information. We're offering information that is guided by scientific effort, that is understood by the scientific community to be as close to the truth as possible. We heard the term truth this morning, and I'm not entirely sure that there is such a thing. But what we do in science is strive towards something that becomes universally accepted. And these are the principles that we use, fair and care principles in science, but I think it applies equally to what we're trying to provide to the general audience. The fact that information, data if you will, if you want to make it even drier, but information that we provide is findable, it's accessible, interoperable, reusable. It has collective benefit. We have authority to control it through science and research. We have a responsibility, and we need to adhere to ethical guidelines. I think these 4 or these 8 principles actually are what we should be trying to use not only in the scientific method, but also when we're trying to engage the public in science. We have a responsibility to bring them good information that is based on, that has a scientific foundation. We've spoken about Science Capital. I'll click through these because I think these 4 points speak a lot to what Carina already spoke about. You can think of Science Capital as a bag that you fill up with everything that you know about science, your social connections, if your parents are scientists, everything that you know about science and the way that you value science in general. That fills up a bag of Science Capital. And we speak of social capital. I think most of you probably know what that is, and just apply science to that and think of it as the same thing. The more you know, the better, essentially. But I think what we also need to discuss is the fact that Science Capital can be quite exclusive, elitist almost. The richer get richer and the poorer get poorer to some extent. So I think we have a tremendous responsibility as science centers and natural history museums to make sure that Science Capital is for everyone, right? That it's accessible to everyone. And I think we are part of the last frontiers in order to carry out this mission. I think we provide hands-on experiences, although technology is something that we try to move forward with, but we're sort of the last frontier to provide that hands-on experience. Okay, so who has the knowledge then? Who has this information? The care and fair principles are great, but who sits on this type of information? Well, I would argue that schools, universities, science centers, research museums are part of the players that have this information through the researchers that, or the research activities that are ongoing there. But of course, just like Peter and just like Carina said, the outdoors has this information, right? Nature has this information. Lots of other places have this information, but it's sort of created, the knowledge is created at schools, universities, science centers, and research museums, I would argue. But who has the mission then? Who has the mission to engage people and to bring this information to a general audience? Well, I think that I'm not sure about the other institutions on stage here, but the Natural History Museum in Stockholm has it in our instructions from the government through the Ministry of Culture that we are to be relevant to people in society. And I think we have that mission to guide people through research in a fun, immersive, and engaging way. I see that science centers have on par an equal responsibility here to bring this information to the general public, and I would argue that schools have it too. Universities, sort of by definition, do not have that same outreach component, or historically they have not. But I'm very, very happy to say that the idea has shifted, or the paradigm has shifted in recent years, and I think we've heard a lot about it this morning as well, how universities also have this mission to bring information in a good way, to have scientific outreach and engagement as part of their pillars at the universities. Okay, so why is this important? Okay, so I'll run through this. Why is this important? Well, there are lots of reasons. I could give you lots of reasons why it's important. I chose this, which is a 2015 study by AAAS, and I realized that the US might in many ways be an outlier in understanding science. So I'm not saying that this is perfect, and I'm saying it's a 2015 study, so it's quite old. But there are certain things here that I think are really, really important. We've spoken about mis and disinformation this morning. I think also lack of information is very, very important, that we bring information to everyone, that is accessible to everyone, pretty much across the globe as much as we can. This study showed that 79% of US adults say that science has made life easier. That's a good starting point. But what is sort of a bit worrying is if you look to the right here, you'll see that US adults think that scientists, 52% of US adults think that scientists are divided as to whether the Big Bang happened or not. Even more worrying, you can see that 37% of US adults think that scientists do not agree that climate change is happening. 29% of US adults think that scientists do not agree to the fact that humans have evolved over time. Right? We speak of mis and disinformation, we speak of lack of information, and this is one of the reasons why, and there are several reasons why, but this is one of the reasons why we have such a strong responsibility to bring information that's based on scientific knowledge and has a scientific foundation to a general audience. And I think that natural history museums and science centers have a critical role in that for the future. Thank you.
Welcome back, Carina and Peter as well. And thank you for your presentations. I would like to start with you, Peter. Obviously, there were many similarities within the three presentations. Did you notice any differences at all?
Any differences? I think when we bring science centres and natural history museums together, there's a difference. There's a difference in hands-on science and experiencing science and looking at science through the lens of the natural world. But what is striking to me is that we are concerned with the same questions, and what comes up again and again is a question of how do we lower the barriers? How do we invite people in? How do we open the doors? And it's not enough just to open the doors. And I think that's, to me, it's the key question. Take this museum, for example. You open the doors, but you still have to climb quite a few steps in order to get in. And that's a huge barrier. It's an imposing building. We have very imposing and intimidating institutions. How do we make people feel welcome? How do we see that this is also their world? And I think what we're talking about is it's at the very center of this. So the differences that I see is our different ways of trying to get rid of those barriers, of finding out what does it mean to actually invite people in, because it's not enough to open doors. We really need to engage with our audiences and our communities in a completely different way compared to what we've done previously.
And taking that further, you both mentioned the science capital approach, and the approach is really about making science relevant for everyone. But in practice, Sebastian, is it possible? Is it possible to offer experiences without being excluding, but at the same time interesting enough for those with knowledge and interest beforehand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we struggle with that on a daily basis, and we'd be at least at our institution, I'd be lying if I say that we didn't think about it on a daily basis and discuss it on a daily basis, because we need to make this engaging experience accessible. Just like Peter was saying, that our institutions are intimidating, perhaps. And we have challenges with accessibility, physical accessibility in the buildings, for example. We think about these things in order to get people through the doors. We think about the cost of going to natural history museums or science centers. We think about how to mitigate those costs in a way that leaves us still sort of at a zero-sum game. And we think about really ways of getting a wide array of demographics into the museum. And there are certain tools that we use for that, and I think some are still under testing, and some are good, and some perhaps don't work as well for us. I think every institution probably has its own set of, or its own toolkit to try to guide people into the museum or science center. And I think we would all benefit from sharing those toolkits with each other. Because there are ideas out there that we don't really know about. I think it is we run the risk of excluding people when we think of science capital in this way. But I think it's important enough to think about it, to think about our mission being building science capital, for us to try to mitigate those risks.
And socioeconomic aspects apart, Carina, do you see any specific target groups that are especially hard to get here, or even in outreach work reach?
Oh, another great question. There are unfortunately several, but if I to start generalizing, I would say us adults in general, because the younger ones are seldom the problem. They are curious enough and don't have the sort of barriers to step into the world of learning, or STEM, or other disciplines. And as adults, I can see parents coming to us tend to be inactive. So that's a barrier we need to address, and we need to understand how to do it. But they do come, because they do come with their children. Another target group, again, I'm sorry, Lena, is actually decision makers in general and politicians, because I would love for us to meet more often. To together think about these issues, and also to understand that we throughout life and need to learn more, need to be in dialogue about these questions. And politicians are, by nature, it's more short term because there's a system in it, but we are infrastructures that are here on a long-term basis, working over generations, having that kind of view, and we would all benefit from a far more closer dialogue than we do have today. And lastly, also another target group is actually, researchers, because I think that it's great that science engagement is part of a sort of university's outreach strategy, but I'd love to see it being part of the research strategy. And there's a difference in this, I think. And I think when I talk to headmasters and trying to be close to the researchers at the university, it's tough because they are not acknowledged when they do invest time and energy and money into that interconnection with us. It's part of the outreach strategy, but it's never part of the research strategy. And I would love to see more of that. So that's also a target group that we're actually pretty tough. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I would like to invite you all, if you have any questions already, not to wait too long for that. Do you have any? Yes, here's a question.
I'll see if you can hear me. Can you share there's a microphone. Can you share an example of when you've left the building and done something engaging in a community or a neighborhood with an audience that's not the typical audience to walk through the doors?
Yeah, Peter, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'd like to give you an example. We've one of the things that we would like to do is not just to engage our local community, but also bring communities together. We would like people in Denmark to connect with people in Sweden, but also going beyond the Western world, going and to see how we can establish a global conversation. We ran an experiment late last year, beginning of this year, where we set up portals of communication in 25 different places around the world. Most of them on the African continent and in Asia and South America. These were portals for communication. We could fit in 5, 8, 10 people that would communicate via a video link to communities, to groups around the world about climate change, about our relationship to nature. This opened up for conversations that would never have happened, and they were full of surprises, and they were incredibly rewarding, especially for our audience. And it was such an eye-opening thing of the commitment, the engagement, and the knowledge of communities in, for instance, Tanzania. This is what we can do as museums, and we ran this as a pilot. How can we start building the logistics for having a genuine global platform for communicating, to establish that global communication that we need, where we are connecting communities and not just talking to our local communities, but really bring people together. So that's one example.
We have time for one more answer to that.
Yeah. Okay, another example is very local then. In Gothenburg, we, together with business community and also the public sort of, what do you call it, facility management, we've gone together out into areas of neighborhoods where you have a multicultural sort of inhabitants, 43 different languages within sort of an area of a few kilometers, and we go out and where they actually we found an area where we could stay inside with the roof over our head, and we meet with parents from all over the world, and they never met themselves even though they are neighbors. So we go there on a regular basis and we bring science with us because that's sort of something to do together, and a lot of things happens there. It's the first time they actively engage with each other, they actively engage with different parties from the society, and we actually now also help we go with them, we take the bus together and go into the center of the city where many of them never have been. So that's also another way of working, where you meet audiences that would never step inside these intimidated buildings, for example. So.
Thank you. We have a comment from Menti as well, I think, Katarina.
There's another question.
Yeah, I think you need Mark. Yeah.
So here's a question from Menti. We hear a lot about schools. How can we increase the science capital of adults?
Sebastian, would you like to answer?
Yeah, great. Yeah, really good question. I think Carina mentioned this before, that it's a real, that adults is a challenging demographic. I think actually that you hit on 3 demographics that wouldn't be traditionally thought of as challenging to get into a museum, and I think you're absolutely right. I agree with that. You know, adults and researchers, I think, are underrepresented at the museum. We all speak about Generation Z, where you know, everything happens on your phone instead of in real life, and how do we get those youngsters now through the doors? How do we get adults? How do we increase science capital with adults? Well, it's a lot more difficult, I'd say, just from a human psychology point of view. The longer that you're sort of ingrained in your view of the world, the stronger it becomes in you. I don't have a recipe for how to engage adults that differs a lot from how we engage you know, other demographics. But I think there, you know, when you think of, I mean, one thing that we do here at the Natural History Museum, I think, is that we and quite naturally we get families in, right? And I think if we engage the children, the adults will be engaged as well. I've heard a story, I forget who told me the story, but there was a Natural History Museum, actually correct me, I think it may have been in Helsinki, that was set to be shut down, and the staff there invited the children of the local politicians to the place to enjoy the surroundings. And obviously that led to the politicians saying, you know what, we're going to keep this place because our children love it so much. And so they funded a place, an institution that was set to be shut down because they saw the inspiration and the joy that the children had. Maybe that's a recipe for that. I'm not sure. I think it's challenging, but I think we have a responsibility to sort of engage society as a whole, and we need to make engaging experiences also for adults. And I'm not entirely sure. Well, I don't have a strict recipe. Sorry.
If you did, you'd be.
Oh. Yeah, I'd be. Yeah, maybe. I don't know, rich, but I would be happy at least.
Yeah. I think we have one brief question here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this very interesting and valuable conference. And I would just like to come back to your statement or that you need to reach the scientists. And I think I was listening yesterday, also attending the conference, and one important thing where it was more on the policy and on the scientific side. And one important thing that was mentioned several times, I believe, is that we need to change the culture. There's a cultural change. And there need to be, and then it was about how to get away from these high impact factors and how to get away from prestigious journals and how to get new incentives for the scientists. And I think it's very important what you said, that for scientists to be able to spend time and to get insight into the value, there should be incentives that if they are only continue to be measured by this high impact, there will be no way to build that into their careers. So it relates quite a lot to what was said yesterday, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Carina, you talked a little about what you need in order to continue your work with science engagement and science communications. And I would like to ask some more about that. Could you elaborate a bit in practice? What do you need?
Oh, please, Lynn. Well, I'll get back to the fact, and I'm repeating myself. I hear that now. But it's actually the fact that I found so challenging in the everyday work that we do that we don't fit into a model. And I think we hear that everyone asks for organizations that actually truthfully look at different perspectives, truthfully are interdisciplinary. And I truly think we are. We do work like that way, and we really try really hard to do that. But again, the system doesn't support that. And that makes it the work really hard. It makes it really, really hard because we need to sort of, I'm not asking for millions and billions of money. Some money is good, it will help us, but it's also the fact that you can address your question somewhere and be listened to, and that there is a long-term sustainable political, societal structure that supports that interdisciplinarity. That is, you know, I'm not the person to solve that, but I'm looking at you again, Lena. I think you are one of these persons who could help us, and that's really something that is needed. So difficult to move forward when there are fractions of questions all the time, when we all understand that we need to have a holistic view and to work interdisciplinary to find these sustainable solutions, to actually contribute to a sustainable future together.
Thank you. And let's take that to a conference of its own, I think.
Yes.
It's big enough.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and we can continue the conversation afterwards. We're going to arrange for the next panel now, and now is a good time to stretch your legs. We'll be back soon. Thank you. You have spent your career in the public sphere in France, but I know that you're a convinced European. And you have worked within two areas in particular, that of health and social affairs, but also culture. And as a synthesis of those two fields, you could say you are now CEO of Universeum in Paris, one of the largest hubs of scientific and technical culture in Paris. And you're also president of Ecsite, the European Network for Science Centers and Museum. Bienvenue à Stockholm.
Thank you, in French.
And welcome, Cissi Askwall, your Secretary General of Public and Science. But you know, moving on to new adventures at the Swedish Research Council. Sure. And you're also president of the European Science Engagement Association. And at the farewell party for you last week, several speakers addressed your sharp communication skills, your ability to bring people together, to work together with great results. So in other words, you are both perfect for this next panel discussion. Because now we're going to address how museums, science centers, and science communication organizations work together on a European level to create engagement. And we have invited you to make a short introduction, both of you, from your perspective. And I would like to ask you, Bruno, to start, if you please.
Okay. That's it. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your kind invitation, dear Cissi and dear Lisa. So I'm the president of Universeum, as you said, with its two venues, public venues in Paris, France. The first one is, well, the second one, Palais de la Découverte, but it's the oldest one because we opened in 1937, but it's now closed for renovation and we have a small temporary facility, 100% wood, eco conception. And the other one is Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, which is the largest one in a big park in the northeast of Paris. Both are science centers, which means museums without collections. But today, as you said, I come as president of Ecsite, the European Network of Science Centers and Museums. Some of you might know Ecsite. Some of my colleagues are members of Ecsite. We have 16 members in Sweden. And let me just remind you in a few words what Ecsite is and, more importantly, what it does. Ecsite brings together various institutions. Oh my gosh, what is this screen? I lost my, okay. Ecsite brings together various institutions, organizations that engage with science. In other words, their goal is to build a bridge between science and society to engage citizens and scientists in dialogue. It is a very large family because we are more than 320 members, 328 to be precise, including natural history museums, of course, science centers, science museums, festivals, research bodies, private companies, and so on. All committed to inspiring people with science, technology, innovation, human ingenuity. You'll find us all across Europe, from Portugal to Poland, from Greece to Sweden, also in Ukraine, which we do not forget. Altogether, we reach 40 million citizens each year with exhibitions, workshops, science-related events, debates, and so on. Most of our audiences are on-site visitors, but we try more and more to reach them digitally, hence broadening our audience to people who think that science is not for them. But this is exactly our goal, making science accessible, understandable, and palatable to everyone, regardless of age, gender, or level of knowledge. Our ambition lies in addressing the youngest to the oldest, in addressing schools and families, both the curious and the experts, and in addressing policymakers to ministers especially, finding ways to attract and to attach them to our museums. What we want is to allow them to understand the crucial issues of our time from a scientific perspective. For, and this is our deepest conviction, science is and will be the culture of the 21st century. But don't get me wrong, we do not tell our audiences what they should do or think. We provide them with access to science through discovery and experimentation in order to let them think and decide by and for themselves. In other words, what we do is empower our visitors, help them find their way in this world, sort out the true from the false. This is, in my view, key to living in a world that changes so quickly, a world that is and will be deeply marked by climate emergency. It is our duty to explain what climate change is, how the greenhouse effect works, etc., etc., but more importantly, it is our duty to explain how to tackle the task we need to carry out, to tell them why and how we can develop low carbon habits and ways of living, how to build a more sustainable world. Science engagement organizations can be the leading edge on this task. This is why Ecsite has announced the launch of the Ecsite Environmental Emergency Pledge, as well as a program of activities for its members. The pledge is a statement of intent designed to mobilize and communicate actions towards environmental responsibility. It aims to encourage our members to take small or big steps in the right direction in order to drive change. So as you see on the screen, through this pledge, our ambition is to lead by example in raising our own standards and practices in what we called the 5 Ps. Programs, which means all activities, events and exhibitions, partnerships, with whom are we working? People, everyone who works with us, volunteers or contributes to our operation, publics, of course the visitors, and places, our physical infrastructures and spaces, which are so big. We know the task will not be easy, will not be achieved in one day, and will even challenge our business models, but it is our responsibility as any other institution emitting CO2, and at the same time, our most critical concern as cultural players specialized in science. Beyond that, empowering our fellow citizens is a way to embolden them to engage and participate in science. We need to show them they can... One more minute. It's cooked. We need to show them they have a valuable role in addressing the global challenges facing humankind. For citizens should be considered as actors of innovation, not just as an audience one should inform or a market one should enter. Most citizens are willing to take part in this global change. According to Eurobarometer survey, September 2021, 61% of Europeans think that involving non-scientists in research ensures that science responds to the needs of the society. So we work and bridge the gap between science and society by linking researchers, educators, policymakers, NGOs, business, industries to the general public. Most of all, I think, I want to stress the fact that we know how to design fruitful relationship with it. We are social designers, to put it in a nutshell, or chefs trying new recipes to help water and oil mix together in a stable way. We are committed to develop evidence-based practices of science engagements as well as science engagements science. I will give example after during this question session. I think we can do more. There is room for improvements. If we want more citizens to engage with science, we need to join forces, Cissi, with other networks, with other cultural institutions, and of course with research institutions. Last, the minister is not here yet, but we need more resources allocated to science, but not only to science communication at large, because we are the people of Europe. So kind of a message in a bottle. Don't be afraid, I won't sing. Eurovision contest is over, and most of all, you won it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bruno. We have a lot more to discuss here, but first, welcome Cissi for your short presentation.
Yes, thank you so much. So nice being here, and actually also being one of the organizing arrangers of this conference. So I'm here as the president of EUSEA, but as you heard, I'm also the Secretary General for Vetenskap och allmänhet, at least for 2 more days. So there are quite a few similarities between EUSEA and Ecsite, and also between EUSEA and Vetenskap och allmänhet. So EUSEA, it's a European network. This is Ecsite. We are your smaller sister, little sister, you could say. We have 126 members, but counting. And in Sweden, Vetenskap och allmänhet has 106 institutional members. So EUSEA attracts, coordinates a network of science communicators, public engagers, so practitioners of different kinds, working at museums, science centers, but also in organizations like Vetenskap och allmänhet, organizing science events of different kinds. And as you can see, just this Ecsite, we have this large annual conference when the community is gathering. We just had that in beautiful Bolzano 2 weeks ago. We also try to gather different tools, formats, good reads for doing science engagement and science communication. So we have this, what we call the science engagement platform. And we also try to meet between the conferences, online gatherings of different kinds to exchange experience and to develop our competencies. We try to, when possible, collaborate with other networks, for instance, lobbying in Brussels, and also to care for one another, to try to get this community going, to have exchange informal meetings of different kinds. So that's what EUSEA is doing, and you said there are 16 Ecsite members. I'm sorry to tell you that so far it's only 2 Swedish members of EUSEA. So this is an open invitation, so check out EUSEA. It might be something for you. It's not very expensive. It's more expensive to become an Ecsite member. Well, we've been talking about open science during these 2 days. We really use it both at Vetenskap och allmänhet and EUSEA. This concept of open science is quite useful when it comes to talking about the importance of science communication and public engagement. So as you heard, and we addressed it thoroughly yesterday, many think of open science as open access, open data, scholarly publications should be open and free to access. But I think it's useful to use open science as a concept also to show that it's about communicating, it's about engaging, involving different stakeholders and the public at large into research and innovation processes. Because, you know, politicians have already decided, we have this common understanding that open science, this is the way to go. So using open science, we know that's, that we all have agreed on that open science is the way forward. And if you find out then that a part of that would be public engagement, science communication, citizen science, so it makes it so much easier. And also, you've seen this this figure, this illustration several times already during the 2 conference days, but I think it's quite useful, showing clearly that the green ones, which we addressed yesterday, and also the purple one, are important parts, of course, of open science, but also the orange one, and also what was briefly discussed in the previous session before lunch, that you should also be open to other knowledge systems. It could be indigenous people, for instance. There are other types of knowledge that you also should take into account. And it's quite interesting that this UNESCO recommendations were actually adopted by all 193 UNESCO member states. So it's really useful, I think, with this recommendation. And you also seen this before. Several have already talked about Science Capital, and now I've filled the bags we saw before that you already know, but it's not only about what you know about science, but also about your attitudes, how much you do science-related activities for different kinds, like going to a science center or watch science TV, for instance. And also, and not at least important, the people that you actually relate to and their attitudes and their knowledge to science and research. So this is also a very useful concept, I think, and a lot of politicians, policymakers feel that it's really important. You think about future competence, and you need to make sure that we have those highly skilled people going into higher education. So we need to build that science capital, because that makes a difference. A lot more people who do have this science capital would be interested in embarking on higher education and eventually maybe a research career. So how do you do public engagement, science engagement? I think it's important always to think of what's the purpose. What do you want to achieve? Why would you do an activity? And then, depending on the activity, what kind of people do you need them to address and get in touch with and engage in this? And of course, you pick accordingly then the right process, with a suitable process to do that. So maybe your purpose would be just to, people should know a little bit more about science maybe, or know about you and what you're doing, raise awareness. Or maybe you would like also to consult, to get some views, some input on what you're doing. Maybe discuss, ethical questions related to research, for instance. But you could also be that you really want to engage and get people to co-create together with you. Through the research and innovation process, it might be very useful to also engage stakeholders or people affected in different ways to get the results as useful and sustainable as possible. So depending on the purpose, you have to pick people accordingly, and then also, of course, choose the right method, the right format, the concepts of what kind of engagement process you want to go through. And this is just to show you that we compiled quite a few different formats and also some good reads in this, what I said before, the European Science Engagement Platform, which can be found then on the EUSEA website. So this was very briefly what I wanted to tell you about.
Thank you, Cissi. And welcome back, Bruno. Welcome. So thank you both. As a starting point, I would like to address you, Bruno.
Ladies first, no?
Not this time. I would like to give you three questions in one, so to say, to reason around. From your European outlook, how big is our challenge? How are we doing with science engagement?
I will begin with the good news, is that visitors came in numbers after the pandemics, and they are back in our science centers and museums. I don't know if you do agree with me, dear colleagues, but everywhere in Europe, in every country, there's a big wave of visitors coming back to our museum. Of course, it's because they were fed up with their screens and being at home, but not only, they are interested in science, as many surveys can show, and so I think we provide them with what they need now. So that's the challenge, is to be attractive enough in a long term, and so that people who are now in our museum come back more and more.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, sometimes there are good news.
Yeah, yeah. And Cissi, from your European experience, how easy is it to share and duplicate best practice? I'm thinking, is there a need to adjust due to different systems, for example, within public administration, education, funding, and so on?
I think, I mean, the basic ideas or concepts could be reused. Of course, you need to make some adjustments and cater to the local context, depending on what kind of people you would like to reach out to and what kind of local circumstances there are, and also, of course, the actual arenas or venues that you're using. So, of course, you need to adapt. But I think there's a lot of good ideas, good formats, and that's why we meet at those large international conferences to really exchange ideas and to get inspiration or steal with pride, if you like.
Yeah, very good. And several organizations have embraced the inclusion of the A in STEM, making STEAM. And this is, of course, to include a broader audience. And again, from your European outlook, do you see science and culture also being competitors in some way? Or is science and scientific culture a natural part of culture as a whole, do you think, Bruno?
I don't think there is more competition with art museum than with other museums. There's no competition. The more museums you have, the more visitors you have. It's not a cake that you have to cut into pieces and with a limited number of people accessing it. So what we have witnessed is that art has been used in science museum for ages, for decades, especially not only to broaden audiences, but as well to help show or explain what is not yet discovered, which is unknown. So artists are very, let's say, working on something that does not exist yet. And that's the difference between research and science. Science, we know what it is. Research, it's questions, not results. So how the artists can help us to talk about questions, which of course is something that does not exist yet. And we have more and more, I think, to focus on research as well as focus on science. And on the other side, on the opposite, art museums are more and more interested in science. You have everywhere exhibitions on, let's say, planet subject or biodiversity. I visited a flower exhibition in Munich 10 days ago at the Kunsthalle, which is a real arts place, but we are interested in new subjects because, of course, artists are interested in our world. So artists are talking about climate change, are talking about the new form of life, of communications, and as a result, the art museum are interested in it too.
Yeah, I think that, I think there's quite a large number of good examples where science and art really can work together. Of course, there are challenges, but also artists and different cultural expressions can help us to grasp the idea of science, and vice versa, that people normally may be more interested in cultural expressions compared to science. Those collaborations can open up to new audiences. And I know, looking at you, Anna Maria, the science galleries, which are unfortunately the very first science gallery in Dublin closed down, but
they will
reopen. Oh,
yes.
That's good. We get good news.
Another good news.
But there are quite a few. So the idea of those science galleries is exactly to mix those two together. I think it's really interesting concepts. I think both arts and science really can win a lot of collaborating.
Definitely. And we do have an art institution at Stockholm University as well.
Yes, it's true. Accelerator.
Yes. And talking about engagement, I was so happy to see so many hands before in the audience. So I don't want to wait too long to let you in to the discussion and the possibility to ask questions again. So do we have any questions in the room to start with? Otherwise, I'm sure we have at Menti. Not yet. Please, Peter.
Well, this would be a comment, but also perhaps an opener for discussion. And I'd like to return to the question of resources that was addressed in your presentation and was also addressed in the previous session. We have a field station in Tanzania, and we built a visitor center just next door, very rural parts of Tanzania in the Udzungwa Mountains. And I am amazed to see what they can do with almost nothing. And I think our discussion about resources should have a different starting point. It should not be us going out and saying, well, if you want us to deliver something to achieve all of this, we need more resources. And before we get more resources, we can't really deliver the next big thing. I think we need to think smarter about the resources, about what we already have. And I think the key is exactly in what you were talking about here, about art and science, but we need to broaden that. We need to think about ourselves as one big ecosystem of resources. And I think our biggest resource is each other. And there's as I see it, a largely overlooked potential in what we can do together. We don't have to each and every one of our institutions to solve everything in terms of inter or transdisciplinarity. If we are connecting all of our institutions in this ecosystem, if we're bringing in schools, universities, NGOs, political organizations, industry, and see this and start working together, I think that would be a smart use of the resources that we already have. And we have quite a lot. We're exceptionally privileged in Europe, and I think we can do a lot more with what we already have.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Do you agree, or yeah, you do?
Quick answer.
Yeah. And Bruno as well, yeah. There's enough to work with to start with, yeah. And what can we do more? Oh, we have a question. Please go ahead.
Bruno presented at the beginning the science centers as science museums without collections, and I sensed a bit of resentment in that sense, but I think that that's actually the benefit of science centers, that they are flexible. And my name is Michalis Tsetsanis. I'm a national contact point in Austria for Horizon Europe, and I'm trying to persuade researchers when they're putting in proposals that they have to take dissemination and communication of the results seriously. And of course, science museums and science centers usually deal with how to put it, not basic research, but the laws of nature, the laws of science, and so on in general. So you experience, I don't know what, gravity, and you experience evolution, and you experience such things. But there is a need to use science centers and museums to communicate actual contemporary research results, so to say, things coming out of, for example, Horizon Europe programs and projects. And I see the benefit there for science centers, that they are, without having their collections, a bit flexible to take up these things. How do you see the role of science centers, or even the previous panelist, science museums, in providing, so to say, a venue for communicating latest science results and research results?
Bruno, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll start saying that I don't like the word communication, because we do not communicate. It goes far beyond that. It's not a question of a message from A to B. You are the emitter, I'm the receiver. It's much more than that. That's why we prefer the word engagement with science, which of course involves different formats, and that is far away from being passive, a passive receiver for something that is given by someone that knows, and that gives something to me that I don't know. That's, I think, the new world in which we are entering is a very different one, where the knowledge is everywhere. You don't have to communicate. Everything is here. So you can have the national libraries, all the knowledge of the world in your pockets. So the question is not to communicate, because we are, you know, overwhelmed by information, but how do we help our visitors or our non-visitors, the audiences, the general public, to know how to swim in the new ocean of knowledge? How do we react in such a new situation? It is really different from the world which we knew before, where knowledge was in books, books were in libraries, and so it was simple, and we needed teachers. Now we have visitors that know a lot more than we know. So the question is how to help them, to train them to have sound reasoning, how to sort information, what is false, what is right, and more, as science is concerned, how do we know what we know? This is the question today. How do I know that Earth is a round shaped? It's the first thing saying it's round. The second is how do we know that? And that's, I think, our new duty as science centers and museum. For me, we are doing the same business. How do we help people to be citizens in this new information world?
I think also we had quite a good examples from Carina at Universeum about all the different roles this large science center takes on. It's not only about science and engage young people or the public at large with science, but it's also to reach out to different communities, to be an important part of the community. So I think really science centers, and I do understand that it's complicated because in this more squared world where you have your museums, your schools, so science centers in somewhere in between. And I know there's some issues with funding in Sweden for science centers, generally speaking, but it's really they have different roles and is really important players locally.
And one role can be to act as an arena platform for many different opinions, even fact-based. You can have different opinions. How challenging is that, you know, for a museum and or a science center to open up and being the sort of monitoring in a good way a discussion that can move forward without excluding and without having an opinion of their own? Do we have enough knowledge in-house to do that, do you think, at our institutions?
Well, that's our job, basically. That's why we are four. And that's why we open our gates in the morning and close them at night. It's because we know, well, we try to do it so, and we try, it works, we are happy, it doesn't work, we try something else, and so we are very humble. Humility, of course, is very, very important. But I think we have to work with everyone, but we have to be as close as possible, but as distant as possible of interferences, you know, because there are interests in society, which is a good thing, but we are serving the public interests, so we are not serving the interest of any particular segment of society, which is very important. So we are different from governments, we are different from science center, we are different from media, we are different from schools. Where we work with them, but knowing that we are different and we keep our freedom of action, which is the most valuable asset that we have, being free to do what we do as museums.
Yeah, but I think museums, science centers, but also like libraries, different culture institutions, community centers are great places for having those discussions. As you say, not all scientists think alike, and there are, of course, many controversial issues to be discussed with new technology, speaking about AI, not the least these days. And of course, it's important then to cater for having that kind of open discussions. And of course, there's a thin line between if there's really pseudoscience, there's really, conspirational theories coming up. So how should you act as a moderator, for instance? But I think it's really great to open up and having those discussions, because there are not so many forums. Of course, there are media, but where people also actively can take part and also be part of a conversation. And I think much more of that are needed. Not only open up and let people engage with science as such, but also to have this public discussion about scientific developments.
But we are curators. We curate the relationship between the public and science. That's what our job is. We are curators. It's not just bringing people in a room and, something happens. It's not as simple as that. We design delicate ways of interaction between subjects and people. And of course, everyone does it in its own way, because I know many science centers and museums, and they are all different in the way that one will work with the university, the other one will work with the industry, another one with a school or with NGO. But locally, it's always a different story, but they are, let's say, rooted to their environments. They build ecosystem. We are ecosystemic by nature.
And also always the local, the national, and the global perspective in a whole. Yeah. I think we have a comment from Menti, Katarina.
Hello. Yes. So here's the question. Open science and open arts, two different worlds, question mark. If art is essential for citizens, it should be more financed and more open and accessible as science. Your views?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
So, of course, I mean, artists, they have their copyright. They can choose for themselves, of course, to let everyone look at, interact, maybe even with a Creative Commons license to interfere and interact with that piece of art, and that's quite common. When it comes to science and open science, I think we all agree on the importance of openness, and that science is really building on, it's like a mountain of knowledge where we build on each other's findings. For art, it could be that way. It could also be very unique, coming from your own experiences. So I think it's more of, this is what I think of instantly. So you please say what you think, but you can choose, if you like, others to interact and to use and to republish and reuse what you have achieved.
Final comment?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. It was all clear.
You used to be a director of an art museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Centre Pompidou.
You still agree? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. We could continue much longer, but we are going to continue to the final speech here. So I thank you so much for your participation. Thank you.
So we're a tiny bit ahead of schedule, so if you just want to stand up and do like this for 1 minute, and then I introduce the next exciting speaker. Så kameran kommer kunna följa dig. Jag tänker, ställ dig gärna centrerat.
Absolut. Trevligt.
Okay. Did you feel how the blood continued running through your body again? Felt a bit stiff? So please have a seat and we continue the program. So there are some empty spaces in the center here if there is filling up in along the sides. All right, exciting. So I'm proud, grateful, and actually quite curious to be able to invite the next speaker of the day. And it's our Minister for Culture here in Sweden. It's Parisa Liljestrand. And you will have the floor now and you'll talk about the way forward. So please, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for having me, I have to say. I was very honored to get the question. Thank you. Well, I have to say that I was really honored to be here and to get the question to be able to address you in a really, really important conference in an important matter. So I hope that you have had 2 really fruitful days here in Stockholm, and that I can contribute with a little bit of perspective. Research must be made accessible both within the scientific community and in the rest of society. Open science is therefore a highly prioritized matter for the Swedish government. This conference is a good example of how different actors can come together in cooperation that benefits the whole society. The National Library in Sweden and the Swedish Research Council have been given the task from the government to coordinate the work being done on open access publications and on open research data. Universities and institutions of higher learning are also tasked with developing the work being done on open science. Many institutions within the cultural heritage sector, such as this wonderful museum, that I hope you have had a chance to see a bit of, are involved in research and closely associated with universities and other research institutions. Cultural heritage institutions have a long tradition of publishing online for the benefit of researchers as well as for the public. We know how important it is that research-based knowledge is spread and is being used in society. This is something that we must care for in order to understand and to be able to handle the big challenges that are facing us and that are ahead of us now and for coming generations. Therefore, another important task is in the Swedish Research Council's work on science communication, including its intention to develop a platform for science and research results. Science communication, the active involvement of researchers and scientists in the public conversation, is an important part of making research-based knowledge more accessible in society and thus contribute to spreading up the transition to a more sustainable society. This is a responsibility of other government agencies and institutions of higher learning and research as well. The goal is to create good conditions for making new research accessible throughout society and to promote dialogue between researchers and the public. Several important tasks are already being done to the end of making science and research more accessible to all parts of society, increasing mankind's understanding of scientific process and making people comfortable and trusting in science. This is positive and hugely important. Making the public engaged and part of the scientific process lead to different kinds of interaction between researchers and society. There are plenty of good examples of that and the positive effects on such interactions. And I have to say that this discussions that you have had during these 2 days are one of the good examples of this. The impact of research is strengthened when the scientific process is opened up and scientific results are made accessible. By making more groups in society part of the scientific process, we can also strengthen the public's knowledge and understanding of these processes. This has many benefits. By strengthening the trust in science and higher education in all of society, we can increase the resilience against disinformation and knowledge resistance. Thank you for listening and thank you for inviting me and having me here today.
Thank you very much. And we have a little gift from the museum.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last bit of today is to summarize these 2 days and how to do that. It's a big task and I'm so happy that I'm not going to do it alone. So the host of yesterday's program, Karin Grönvall, our national librarian here in Sweden, please welcome up.
Thank you.
To the stage. And we have this joint task now to summarize these 2 days. And I was looking into the aims of this conference. And so what we said from the start was that the aim of the Open Science from Policy to Practice conference was to highlight different perspectives of shaping, implementing and embedding open science, as well as exchange knowledge, share best practice, and to discuss how open science can contribute to sustainable future and democracy.
It's a great
it's in and beyond European Union. So it's really something that we are devoted to and wanted to contribute to, and those were the aims. So how do you feel, Karin?
Well, the aims, we have to look at the aims in a longer perspective, I suppose. But I say so far what you can expect from a conference. I think we've really been discussing a broad variety of issues. We've been discussing a sort of policy, how can you implement the policy, and we have had great discussions. So in that sense, yes, and then you have to take it back home and see how can you actually act from these new perspectives you have gained. So yes, I would say yes. We have also stated, I think, that policy is policy, and then the researchers have to do the research in an open way. But our sort of perspective is really to make it possible, and policy can enable open science. That's something I remember from the discussions. So yeah, well. So what's your view from day 2?
Yeah, so I would say just in general over the 2 days that I think something that we really achieved was to have a fantastic turn up. So it's both been on site but online as well. So I heard that yesterday at some point we had close to 800 viewers digitally, and it was also maybe 100 or more both today and yesterday in the room. So I think that the interest is impressive, and I think what made this conference a bit special was that we had colleagues crossing borders. I never met so many librarians, I think, at the conference before.
You never met
even though the bulk was
I have.
academia. You have, I'm sure you have, but have you met as many museum representatives as you have?
Not on that international perspective. No, that's true.
Exactly.
No, that's true.
So in that sense, we have come together, I think, over these 2 days, and hopefully it's been, as our Minister for Culture mentioned, it's been fruitful discussions, and I think seeds are, I think, put into the soil as new perspectives meet.
Yeah, but and also politicians, researchers, policymakers. There's really been a wide variety of perspectives in this conference.
NGOs.
And that's been very fruitful, I think. And I'm also very glad that we had the State Secretary for the Ministry of Education and Research open the conference, and she was very clear, this is a priority, top priority for the Swedish presidency with open science. And I'm very glad that the Minister of Culture, Parisa Liljestrand, also said the same thing, agreed on that. So that's give us sort of a very, very, very good starting point and a very good bottom to keep working on this area.
It's a really good incentive for us to focus and join. So I just need to have a look here. So it's just our names. We were discussing we should have a Menti question, but maybe we do have one.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're ready with your phones and you have logged into the Menti with the code shown here on the your right-hand side, you can answer a question. And do we have the question here as well? What are your takeaways from the conference? Yes, so please do that while me and Karin will continue chit-chatting a bit more.
I might wait for the results there. And maybe we should move backwards to the first day again at the National Library a little
absolutely.
bit. Yeah. And our starting point there was, of course, the assignment we have from the government to make new sort of policy for open science and national guidelines. But I can think of 3 themes that I sort of noticed the first day, and the first one was really costs. I think costs got into everything. The discussion, is open science more expensive, or is it just a sort of transition period that is more expensive? But every area we discussed, publication, that is expensive now, and also building capacity and building infrastructure is really expensive. So that was something that really went through everything we talked about. And also it in the council conclusions that we all look forward to, that probably will be decided on next week. Cost is a main issue, so that is very important. The other theme is connected to that, I would say, is the global perspective, because we now in the European perspective, we're getting closer, we have more sort of common policy making, but we can't forget the global perspective, and the UNESCO guidelines are very clear in that area. And then costs again is an important issue, not to leave some of the research outside, because we need the global perspective to solve our very big challenges we have in the society. And the third one that we didn't really discuss so much, but I think it was there all the time, it was really security. With the new situation in Europe, and we're talking a lot about openness. Are there any new perspective we have to take in? Can everything be open? I think a lot. It's very important to keep very open, but maybe we have to rethink a little bit. We also have to make sure that access to information is possible in a crisis. I think that's something we have to consider. So I think, those were the sort of big themes I took with me from yesterday. But science, that's some more internal science making, but if you look at the more policy making perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we managed to move from the last session of yesterday. It was about citizen science. That was a perfect bridge into today. And that was, as you're pointing out, more leaning towards policy, the interaction, the engagement, inviting everybody into the process. And we had some really good examples from many different countries. So then I should mention that Cissi, you can confirm, but all the sessions will be available afterwards online. Yeah, and I get the thumbs up. So since there's been people coming and going over the different sessions, and this possibility will be online for the future. So we learned, for example, that MLE is not a female name. It's short of mutual learning exercise. I think that's something actually to remember, because that's is something that the European Commission is working on and was presenting yesterday, that I think had some really concrete tips on how to move forward with citizen science. And that would then be the bridge for today, where we focus on embedding open science in society. And the second half of today, where we've been talking about accessibility to and involvement in science. And there have been so many examples, I think, today from both science centers and natural history museums. We heard Peter from Copenhagen talking here about examples from our neighboring countries. And I think that what we hear is something that we recognize, and that we're challenged by the same problems, but also that it is both science centers and natural history of today were really aware of the challenges, and we have a determination to contribute to the solutions. And to be able to do that together, as Cissi and then Bruno represented at the very last sessions of today, how the European networks that is already existing, EUSEA, Ecsite, you were representing here as the presidents, I think that also gives this hope for the future that I think we need after having a full 2 day of covering all these different topics.
Yeah, I think hope for the future is a very good takeaway as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And do you see what's happened here? I think we have a word cloud. Maybe you've seen this for a while now, but we're standing too close to even see the cloud here. Sorry for that.
Culture change was really, I can say culture change, that was really the word for yesterday. What is needed to make open science the norm? That with just science is open science. And many of the speakers really put that cultural change is the most important part. And that takes time, so I think that's a good takeaway. Culture change takes time, we need to have patience, and we're moving forward. So what do you say?
I saw trust there, and then it all changed, but it was up and very green and big for a moment there. And I think that's a word that we heard a lot today. From the morning sessions, like the importance of trust to be able to build a great foundation for the development of open science.
It can also diverse career paths, and maybe that has to do what we discussed also with that we need support for the researchers, because it takes more time. That was someone really stated yesterday, that because you have to keep track of your data, you have to really work very carefully with that. You need data scientists, you need people supporting the open science paradigm. So that's also important to say that there are different roles here.
Very good. I feel that we've been chit-chatting so long. So
so what do you take away? What's your takeaway?
So the main takeaway, there are a few things. Actually, from today, I was thinking about the determination that the Austrian Federal Ministry represented with their 10 points heading towards the future. So I would like to revisit that, actually, and read over those 10 points. You were mentioning before to think long term. That's how we would actually make things change. And I think by a 10-point program from a federal ministry could actually be a way forward. I'm also thinking about Axel Verkander from the Netherlands. He said something that, I don't know, so I have so many notes with my scribbling down, but he said something along the lines of open science is not only making publications available free of charge. Like you said, yesterday we talked a lot about money, but it's not only about that, it's really also, and I think that's something for museums to take as a home message, is also making it understandable. So working on the science literacy. So things can be available, yes, check that box, but if we can't understand what it says, then we haven't achieved much anyhow. There will still just be circling around the researchers, which of course is a benefit of its own, and it will keep open science has a benefit, but we could widen that and make it more inclusive. So that would be two things.
Two things there. Yeah.
And I'm happy to share a third, but I...
No. I'm just, well, I will make a sort of more overall takeaway. It's really that we're moving forward, I will say, and that it's so important that we together, at the policy level, really agree and move forward together, because that will enable open science for the researchers. So that's what really I think, it is possible.
Yes, absolutely. I sort of have a vision of what Ellen Bruno was mentioning from the Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center. We used the term knowledge brokers. I don't know, has that...
Is that word? No? You can write it in later.
I mean, because I think that was quite inspirational. And she was pointing out also, imagining that being a network that is all over Europe or globally. Knowledge brokers, that I would love to have that on my CV.
Okay, it's a time to
yes.
wrap up.
I think it is absolutely the right time to wrap up, and we'll have a few minutes to maybe stand up and talk to your neighbors and leave this room as you feel ready. And what's that? And then we have guided tours to offer, exactly. But I don't think we have a slide for that. But what you can do is that you can have a coffee and have and sit down for a bit, and then approximately 1:15, there will be guided tours offered throughout the museum. So we'll divide into both Swedish-speaking groups and English-speaking groups. So I'm happy to invite you to that. And
I would like to say thank you to everyone that's been here on site today and yesterday. It's been lovely to host this event, and also great thanks to the arrangers, to those organizers who really got this program together. There were 12 institutions working together. You really done a great job. So thank you, everyone. I would like to say.
Riksbankens Jubileumsfond for supporting financially. So thank you, everybody.